So, okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. First of all, a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us despite your busy schedules. Inshallah, I pray that this is beneficial. I wanted to start with a bit of a recap. Oh, first of all, one of the things that Alhamdulillah I did get around to doing is reading the homework responses that were given for the lesson one that we had. MashaAllah, they were outstanding responses. I thought I would choose some of the responses and show them to you, but that was quite a hard job because there were amazing responses. So very quickly, we'll remind ourselves of that assignment and look at some of the responses that you respected students gave. If you remember, we were talking about different approaches to somehow attracting people to religion, calling them, making them consider and value the importance of religion. One way was a claim that religion is the cause of perfection. Another one was this idea that religion will save you from harm. The third was the idea that religion is the way to give thanks to God who has blessed us. And then the way that I was arguing based on the book that I'm using, that it makes the most sense and is the most effective, although all of these ways, mashallah, are, important, correct Islamic ways. The fourth way was one of somehow appreciating this idea that true pleasure and true happiness comes from religion. It's just some different comments that you gave with regards to the first way of religion being the cause of people's perfection. Some of you students in your analysis of this, the negative aspect was exactly what I had in mind. That the difficulty is understanding what is man's perfection. Perfection is not just tied to their effort, to his efforts alone, but also the connection he has with Allah. The idea that perfection is not that natural, not that easy. Somebody wrote the words less tangible. Some people had this interesting point that maybe people wouldn't have a goal to kind of perfect themselves because they might think that, oh, I'm never going to become perfect anyways. Or they may be happy with a lower level of perfection. So all of these are negative aspects of it that would somehow make it maybe not the best argument to make. A lot of you gave negative aspects to the second approach, that to focus on the harm, to focus on hell, that's not something that's going to be very effective. Okay, it introduces Allah as somebody to be afraid of. This was a nice one of the brothers said that using negative reinforcement, fear as an objective, this has been shown in psychological studies to be less effective. And there's even a quote, mashallah, different students quoted different psychological theories at times. Mashallah, there's a lot of background knowledge that you guys have. With regards to the third approach of giving thanks, it was very interesting to see a very big spectrum of responses. Some people were against it, but some people really appreciated this approach and thought that this way was the very best approach to introduce religion, to go towards God. Okay, so as one of the students said, some positives of this approach are that it involves a lot of positive connection with God, making us feel humbled towards His greatness, doesn't rely on fear or abstract ideas, emphasizing the importance of gratitude and humility. Okay, a couple of people said that this is positive. It gives you this feeling of, somehow appreciating God, as opposed to the fear one of being scared of God. Some final points, these are quotations from different students that in the West we may need to use, things are so complicated nowadays, we might need to use different approaches. One approach alone might not work. Some of you agreed with what I was saying, that happiness is the best approach, basically. It's the most effective, and everybody is looking for happiness in their life. Everybody is looking for meaning in their life. Yeah. So, anyways, Alhamdulillah, mashallah, these were amazing responses. Very happy to see a lot of, efforts that went into responding to this homework assignment. I did, if you saw the email, I did send another assignment that pertains to last week and this week's material as well, inshallah. So do try to fill that out, please. Okay, inshallah, as we get started, just again to put the kind of current lesson in the bigger picture of our discussion on epistemology. The first lesson was about the whole idea of studying religion. It was separate from epistemology. From the lesson two onwards, we are going into epistemology. And like I said last week, the main meat of the material will be in lesson two to five. Lesson six, seven, eight will be an interesting activity in, catching mistakes in thinking, fallacies. But the main concrete part of an Islamic approach to epistemology and, how our knowledge is of value, how we can respond to skeptics to a certain extent at least, that will be discussed in these lessons over here. Last week we talked about the division of knowledge, and I want to quickly recap and add some more examples of that and kind of show you how important that is. And today we're going to also touch on something extremely, extremely important. This is the idea that all of our knowledge is not necessarily 100% certain. We can depend on, and it is very logical, it is very expected to use probable thinking and reasoning that is a strong argument, even if it is not 100% true, okay, or 100% certain. Next week, we'll talk about this idea of taking knowledge from other people. Our knowledge is limited. At times, we have to hear from other people, refer to experts, but there are certain criteria and things to keep in mind when we do follow the teachings of other people that we'll talk about next week. And then lesson five will somehow bring together lesson two, three, four to clearly respond to people who have other opinions. The idea of skepticism, the idea of positivism, where you're limiting what is real to just be the physical world. We want to somehow clearly say that no, with an Islamic outlook, we can understand reality and we can at times make claims about the immaterial world using our intellect, using our thinking. Okay, so that's kind of the final conclusion of epistemology will be in lesson five. And then lesson six, seven, eight will be a kind of useful, fun, inshallah, endeavor in fallacies. I'll pause here if anybody has any questions, clarifications. Otherwise, inshallah, we can start recapping what we did last week and then inshallah go into this week's material. At any time, of course, please do feel free to ask questions. Okay, last week we talked about this idea that knowledge can be divided into two types. The Arabic terminology was huduri versus husuli. This stems from a deep understanding of reality where we as the knower are an immaterial being. It is our soul that knows knowledge. And so there are two ways that our soul can come to know something. One is something when directly that object of being known, the thing being known, is there in our soul. And that's called presential knowledge, direct knowledge. When you are in pain, when you are having an emotion, when you are different states that you might be going through, your knowledge of your own soul, that is something that you know directly. The other idea is the idea which is the main knowledge that we talk about, the knowledge that, as I'll mention shortly, the subject of logic is exclusively looking at the second type of knowledge, and that is called acquired knowledge or ilm husuli in Arabic, where there is this intermediary, this mental image that I have that is an image of what I have knowledge of, the picture I have of your face, the construct I have in my mind of the sound of your voice. These are mental images. That's not the real person of who you are, or I guess even your voice is not really there. It's something that is somehow come into my mind, and then my soul knows it in that way. There's an important point here that how do I know that mental image? That mental image, I have presential knowledge of it. That is now in my soul. That piece of knowledge, that ilm husuli, that I know in a presential way, but it itself is an intermediary between the external reality that am learning about, and so that's called acquired knowledge. We further divided acquired knowledge into two different types. We said it's either tasawwur or tasdeeq. Either it is a concept or it is an affirmation. And shortly I'll make a few more points about that. But then I said both of these, regardless of whether it is an affirmation or a conceptualization, they are again of two types. Either there's something self-evident. The Arabic word here is badihi, where we don't need to think about it. It's very obvious. Or no, it is something that needs thought, needs logical thinking to come to a conclusion. And that's where the subject of logic helps us, that in the process of thinking, to come to a conclusion, to prove something, be it a concept or normally, not, we're not talking about concepts, normally we're talking about affirmations. That's where the subject of logic and the rules of logic and getting familiar with fallacies, that's where all of that will help us. Okay, a couple of examples. Think about this. If you look outside and you see that the leaves are falling, what kind of knowledge is that? Is that going to be presential knowledge or acquired knowledge? What do you guys think?
It would be presential
Why do you say that, Jawad?
because you're seeing it in the moment falling, or
No, everybody else on the chat is saying
saying
acquired.
I noticed, yeah.
You guys need to fight this out. Do you stand by what you said, Brother Jawad? Do you think it's presential?
Uh,
Again, why did you say it's presential?
because you're actually in the moment seeing the leaves falling, right?
Still, the idea, Brother Jawad, is that that is an external reality that's not in your soul. Okay, you are developing a mental construct. When you look at the leaves
Got it. Yeah.
falling, so yeah, it would be, as the others said, mashallah, it would be acquired.
Awesome.
Yes, Brother Masood?
Sheikh, now I just have a clarification for knowledge that is badihi.
Mm-hmm.
So badihi only falls under the category of acquired and mahsuli, and it could be conceptual or affirmative. But
That's
when
right.
we say badihi, there still requires a thought. So even though it's self-evident, there's still a thought, and that's what makes it distinguishes it from al-mahduri. Because sometimes when you
Mhm.
say self-evident, it can carry over into al-mahduri because that is what you know.
Right.
It's so obvious that because you feel it, or like we mentioned, the
Yeah,
examples
yeah,
of pain and hunger. So
right.
I just wanted to, because there's a very subtle difference there, and I just wanted to make sure, even
Yeah,
with
no,
badihi
you're
knowledge,
right.
there's a thought.
There is a similarity here in that both of them are obvious. But the
Mhm.
idea here is that the ilm huduri, it's like just truth that you know right away. It's not even something that is now a mental construct where you have
Mhm.
concepts being put together and, developing a sentence out of it, an affirmation, a proposition. That is the case in ilm husuli. And
Mhm.
so the knowledge of ilm husuli at times it can be something that when you look at it, you know right away without even having to prove it. It's very obvious. That's what we would call badihi.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no problem. Another example, the feeling of coldness. What do you guys think? Presential, acquired? Any thoughts, brothers, sisters? Presential, ilm huduri, mashallah. Yeah, as if you're feeling cold, your feeling of coldness that you are going through would be presential, mashallah. Okay, it's your inner state that you can somehow recognize. But then, yeah, this was a trick question. I already put the answer up. That then, if you now somehow ponder upon it, and you make a statement in your mind saying that I am feeling cold, now there is acquired knowledge that can be developed from that presential knowledge that you had. Okay, so you can also have this intermediary to look somehow the intermediary between you and your presential knowledge can become. So that presential knowledge is directly accessed as well, but you can develop a mental construct about it. Brothers, sisters, this is what I'm presenting to you is a paradigm of Islamic knowledge that later on, as we talk about the knowledge of Allah Ta'ala, we talk about the revelation, we talk about shuhud, which we will talk about in epistemology, that one of the ways of attaining knowledge is through spiritual unveiling. I'm not saying that all philosophers would agree that all of these things I just mentioned are very obviously ilm huduri. But at the end of the day, these are discussions that we would come back to. And philosophers would debate, okay, what is the knowledge of Allah? What is the revelation? It would probably be explained as ilm huduri. And so these are, this is an understanding that we will take forward, inshallah, as we further discuss Islamic beliefs. A final kind of recap point over here about the idea of ilm husuli, acquired knowledge. This is a nice kind of diagram that shows us this idea that there is this external reality, a leaf, and you look at it and you recognize the reality of the leaf, the characteristics of the leaf. You develop a mental construct. Although here it's very physical in your brain. Islamic philosophers would say no, that the brain is just a tool. And at the end of the day, it is the soul, the immaterial soul that has that knowledge. But regardless, the idea is there that there is this essence or idea image of the leaf that is in your mind. And again, I mentioned this, how do you have that knowledge? That knowledge, that mental image, is something that is in your soul. So then you now have presential access to that, presential knowledge of that. Just as a side point for your interest, those of you who are interested in pursuing Islamic studies in a bit more detail, this whole idea of ilm husuli is the discussion that is discussed in the field of Islamic logic, the subject of mantiq. The whole idea of calling it Islamic logic, I know some Muslims would not agree with that, but generally, a lot of people would say, no, that's fine. When we say Islamic logic, Islamic philosophy, we mean a subject that is in line with the intellect. And the intellect is also a tool of Islam, of uncovering reality. These are subjects that, yeah, it's true, they were not first introduced to people from Quran and Hadith. They were something that previous civilizations had developed. And then during the lives of our Imams, alayhimussalam, during the, Abbasid dynasty, these works were translated into Arabic and entered the Muslim world, and Muslim philosophers, Muslim thinkers developed them. This is a picture of one of the earliest and most important Muslim philosophers called Farabi. They call Farabi al-Muallim al-Thani. The idea being that the initial teacher who introduced these intellectual sciences was Aristotle, and then the second teacher who introduced them to the Muslim world was Farabi. And so from Farabi apparently onwards, one of the ways that logic has been approached, even today modern books of logic in the Hausa will discuss conceptions and affirmations, tasawwurat and tasdiqat. Majority of the discussions would fall under one of these two categories, where either we're talking about concepts in our mind and how do we think properly to develop a correct concept, or how do we develop our thinking to do with affirmations. So when it comes to concepts, you're thinking about things like a definition. I don't just mean like a dictionary definition here. I mean like the concept in your mind of who is a human being. How do you define a human being? That would be something that in the field of logic, under the chapter of tasawwur, conceptions, they would discuss that. When it comes to affirmations, there would be very detailed, very complicated discussions of the rules of a syllogism, qiyas, or other types of affirmations that we'll look at today, induction, analogy. Anyways, my point was just that these are subjects that Alhamdulillah, what we're able to do in this class is present some of the conclusions in a very practical way, but these are discussed in a lot more detail in the field of logic and Islamic philosophy, basically. Ahsan, sister, one of the sisters says that, yeah, the Quran also has really, encouraged people to think and use their intellect. And so this whole idea that, Islamic philosophy and logic and these things are separate from Islam, that's not a very strong argument, and it's not a correct kind of approach that some scholars have taken. Anyways, inshallah, what I want to do now is I'm going to take a break to pray, but I just want to leave you with a riddle and a question to think about. Think about it yourself, talk to one another about it. The riddle is as follows. Look at this image. There are three people who are sitting on a staircase. They are each looking ahead of them, and so the one at the top can see the two people in front of him, and the second person can see the person in front of him, and the guy at the bottom cannot see anybody. Okay, so they're not allowed to turn around, but they know that there are five hats in this scenario, three white hats and two red hats. Okay, and they all close their eyes, and a hat is placed on their head. At this point, the guy at the top, I said only white and red, right? So why is his hat gray? The guy at the top, his hat is gray because it's not important. It doesn't matter what his hat is. What happens when they open their eyes is that first the person at the top is asked, "What color is your hat?" And he looks down at the two people in front of him, the colors of their hats, and he says, "I don't know. I don't know what color my hat is." And then the second person who heard that, he now is asked, "What color is your hat?" And he looks at the person in front of him and he says, "Oh, my hat is white." And then again, he, the bottom person is asked, and he says, he heard again what the two people before him said, and he says, "My hat is red." So I want you to think about that. This is an example of how the thinking that these people go through can be opened up to be shown to be syllogisms, and how with some initial knowledge they can come out with a conclusion. So think about that a little bit and see if it's very obvious to you. It shouldn't be that hard. MashaAllah, you guys are smart. That's one question I have. Second question I have is just this idea that I already kind of indicated, and if you read the notes, you have an idea of what we'll be coming to today. But had you not read the notes, had you not heard this from me, what was your initial thought if I were to tell you that do we need 100% certainty in the principles of our faith? Or is 98%, 99% certainty enough? Okay? Inshallah, I want you guys to think about that and give me 5 minutes or so, a little bit more maybe, and I'll come back, inshallah.
Salam alaikum. Sorry. I didn't quite get the premise of the first one. Did Sheikh say that the person at the topmost went first and he didn't have an idea of what the hat is, but he called out what the next two hats were, and then the middle person knew what his hat color is with certainty, and then it was the time kind of turn of the last one, and he also knew. Was that the case? Or because otherwise, they're probabilistically, it's quite ambiguous on if you go the other way.
Assalamualaikum. I don't think the Sheikh talked about certainty when he was talking about the three of the people in the picture or the hat colors. Um, I think that was a separate question, no?
Right. I think the second one is unrelated to the first one. So the first one
Yeah.
is about that you can use logic and information that's available to you to come to a conclusion. Is that what it is?
Yeah, I think he's asking what is the thought process, the logic that they used, each one of them used to answer the answer that they did. The person at the top said, I don't know about the color of his hat. The person in the middle said, I have a white hat, and the on third step said a red hat. Now I wonder, they're not allowed to look back. Can they look to the side though?
Yeah, unless the person was sitting at the top called out the next two hats that they saw. But even
I
if
have a thought. If the person at the top said, I don't know, and only two hats were put on, right?
no, they said there were five hats, right? Three
There were
white and
five hats put on, but there's only three people, so did some people have like two hats on, or?
there were only three hats that were put on, but from a total of five hats.
Oh, I see.
But just for the middle person, if he looked in front and the person in front of him was wearing a red hat, then it's an equal probability of whether he is wearing a red or a white hat. So it must be that the topmost person called out what the hats were that he saw. I don't know.
Hey, Assalamu alaikum again. So, did anybody figure out the riddle? Was I not clear? Maybe I didn't explain it properly.
Then I'm Sheikh, are there only three people?
There's only three people, okay? But they all know this idea that there were five hats, that three of them were white, two of them are red, and they can all hear what the previous people said, and they can all see the people ahead of them. Did anybody figure it out? So the first person looks down and he says, I don't know what color my hat is. Does that make sense? Why does he not know? That makes sense, right? Because everybody's eyes were closed when the hat. Okay, look, Sister Zahra, the one in white can see the red. If the one in white was wearing red, though, aha, Sister Zahra got it. Everybody, mashallah, Sister Zahra got it. If the one in gray, like the top guy, okay, if he had seen two red hats ahead of him, he would have right away known that his own hat is white. Make sense? So the fact that he doesn't know means that both of them are not red. And so when the second guy sees that, oh, the one ahead of me is red, it means that his own one has to be white. Only Sister Zahra got it. MashaAllah. Okay. I'll be honest, it was hard for me, but I told my wife and she figured it out in like 5 seconds. So, MashaAllah. Okay, so that
Sheikh,
was,
I have one comment. Like, if
yeah.
you're relying on what the other people are saying,
Mm-hmm.
right? And because if what you see is not enough to make a conclusion, and you're relying on what the other people are saying, you have to assume that they are able to make a rational deduction.
Yeah, I guess
So,
so.
so
Yeah,
you
yeah.
might realize that, hey, I'm a smart guy. I can come to conclusions rationally, but you cannot assume that of everyone.
So in this riddle, yeah, in this riddle, you're making an assumption that everybody is completely like with it and they've thought through things properly and they've said the right thing. Okay. Anyways, like I said, this is an example. If you open this up, you can somehow develop syllogisms that are being used here. That, okay, if both hats are red, then my hat is white, and both hats are not red, therefore my hat is, I don't know, whatever. So it's this idea of how, your mind can start off with some pieces of knowledge and think and come up with new pieces of knowledge. Okay, that was inshallah a useful activity. With regards to the second question, I want to know what you guys think. Would it have been scandalous to hear something like that? That, oh, we don't need to have 100% certainty in our principles of faith. What do you guys think? Does anybody think that that's not appropriate to say? To say that we don't need to have 100% certainty?
I think the arguments that you make in the reading are very convincing.
Yeah, yeah.
Because they don't talk about numbers, they talk about real life. But for like
Mm,
190, 100, 98, 90%, that it's I wouldn't say for sure, like it's not very definitive. But the example
yeah.
you gave like a little child typing on a computer or monkeys typing on a computer producing
Mm,
words, those are clear.
right, right. We'll come to those examples again in the slides, inshallah. Sister Huda?
Yeah, thank you, Shreya. I don't find it offensive to ask that question. And I think a lot of the basis of our faith is aql, is logic. And so if we want to be rational beings, we could deduce and conclude things, but doesn't mean that we have 100% certainty. Um, I think in every material or immaterial level is necessary to achieve that. I don't think you need to do that to be able to believe it.
Yeah, yeah. I'll just say something that's gonna come later on, inshallah, and it's there in the notes. It's a really important point that Brother Zain just mentioned this as well, that our soul has this idea of certainty and probability, and okay, I trust something to a certain amount, I trust it more and more. But in modern sciences, they've mapped these kind of qualities to quantities. And then we've somehow been made to think that that quantity is a reality. Whereas if we go back to our soul doesn't really have the ability. This is the claim that Muslim, at least this, kind of these authors that I'm using to prepare this material, our soul doesn't really differentiate between 98% and 100%. That's why even in Islamic subjects overall, they don't approach these things in this way. You guys must be familiar with ahkam of how, there is certainty and then there's like almost certainty that's treated in ahkam in fiqh as if it's the same thing as certainty. So for example, everything is najis, or sorry, everything is tahir for you until you are sure it's najis. What does that mean? Does that mean that you have to have actually seen, like let's say according to your marja, a Hindu is najis? Okay, you have to have actually seen a Hindu touch that food in front of you with wet hands and then you treat it like it's najis? No, it means that if you're in a situation where, practically speaking, it's obviously going to have been touched by a Hindu, you're going to their house, you know that they cook with their own hands, they don't wear gloves when they're cooking. That gives you enough of a certainty that you have to now treat it like it's najis. Okay, so Muslim scholars didn't really differentiate. This is more a modern thing that has happened in the West, where, and it's very useful for certain sciences, for certain purposes, where they take qualities and they map them to quantities. Heat is another example. Heat is a quantity that something is either hot or very hot or less hot, but we have somehow mapped it to temperature and said that, okay, really, really, really hot is 100 degrees Celsius. A little bit less hot is 80 degrees. And, we've made based on mercury and the amount that mercury expands, we've somehow graded these qualities. Whereas in reality, when it comes to our soul, we don't really differentiate between these things. And so this is a really cool point to think about. Inshallah, as we go forward, you'll see how it's really important when it comes to our beliefs. We're not now forcing a Muslim to have this hard task ahead of them of proving everything using deduction and 100% solid certainty. No, we're saying for now, if there is a very strong evidence for religion, go ahead with it and believe it and implement it, follow it. And inshallah, that following will bring about purity of your soul, and you will come to higher levels of knowledge and faith. But you can't expect to have 100% certainty in everything. Okay, inshallah, with that, I'm going to now enter, but I see there are some messages on the chat, so very quickly I'll try to read through it. Brother Akil says, I've read in the books of Shuhada that one argument for faith in Islam is that there is nothing better that they have come across. So I wonder, can we start with 99%? Exactly. That's what I'm going to be claiming, Brother Akil, that we're going to be claiming exactly that. Brother Muhammad Hadi, faith cannot really be measured numerically. Exactly what we're saying. For our mind souls, it's hard to distinguish between 100 and 98. So are all of these measurements like temperature relative? I'm not saying they're relative, Brother Ali Zahid, but I'm saying that the reality of heat is not a quantity. The reality of heat is a quality. And they have somehow mapped that quality to a quantity. Okay, that's what Muslim philosophers are saying. Okay, so let's go in. So basically, to start off this discussion, what we're talking about is now theoretical knowledge. So within that division, ilm huduri, we're not looking at ilm huduri anymore. We're just looking at ilm husuli, acquired knowledge. That acquired knowledge is specifically affirmations. Okay, the tasdiqat, affirmations that are not badihi, that are not self-evident. Affirmations that need an argument, need a kind of proof in order to accept. We can divide these proofs into two different types. Either we have 100% logically solid proof, like the syllogisms, deduction, it's called. We gave some examples of those last week. This idea that, okay, all human beings grow. Mahdi is a human being. Mahdi grows. That's 100% solid inference, a syllogism, deduction. No doubt about that statement, right? There are certain things that we can prove like that, but all of the principles of faith, we don't have to struggle to find such solid proofs. Maybe we can't at times. And so, certain aspects of when we're claiming that God needs to send prophets, when we're claiming that God is the designer, there is a designer for the world. Okay, this is going to be a proof that is very, very strong, but maybe it's not going to be a 100% solid deduction syllogism. And so that then falls under the second category called probabilistic inference. The Arabic terminology here is hisabul ihtimalat. This is a kind of modern Arabic term that isn't used in the old books of mantiq, but it encompasses different discussions that are there in the old books of mantiq. Okay, so for example, induction. Induction, when you're looking at a few or even a large number of examples, and now you're generalizing to make an overall statement, that would be an example of using this probability or probabilistic inference. Okay, Let's go forward and look at a few examples of this and how we can see that we base our life on this. It's very normal. Science and our day-to-day life is based on such probabilities. Okay, so for example, doctors come up with a new medicine. How do they know that the medicine can be relied upon, that it's effective, that it's safe? They test it. They test it again and again and again in different situations. People of different backgrounds, different ages, different genders, different countries. And eventually they come to a conclusion that, okay, this medicine is effective and it's safe. The first time they tested it, the second time they tested it, there may have been a probability that, okay, it just randomly worked. The person had the medicine, but they also did something else that cured them. Eventually, after hundreds of tests, thousands of tests, they can come to a very strong conclusion that this medicine is working and it is the cause of people being cured of their sickness. Okay? Another example, let's say somebody were to have like 100 numbered objects. Okay, so for example, like marbles. Let's say you had marbles that are in a bag. They're all the same shape, but they have a number on them. What is the possibility that you are going to pull them all out in the right order without looking? You just put your hand and you randomly pick out number one, and then you randomly pick out number two and number three. The probability is going to be so minute, so small that, okay, if you want to map it to a mathematical probability, there still is some percentage there, 0.00000 whatever, but nobody lives their life like that. If you were to ask somebody, they would say it's impossible. And that's a logical conclusion. You have knowledge of this reality that that is not going to happen. You're not going to pull out 100 numbered objects in the exact correct order. And then the last example was the one that Brother Zain was mentioning, that you get a scientific book. You look at the book and you see that, subhanallah, it's full of knowledge. There's a nice structure, there's an order, there's a flow. And somebody tells you, oh, a kid randomly just sat in front of a computer and clicked buttons and wrote that entire book. Again, okay, mathematically, there may be some minute possibility here, but nobody lives their life depending on that. Okay, we all live our life with so many things that happen in our day-to-day life. Why did you come to class today? You could have said, oh, there's a possibility that my teacher will be asleep. That's actually a high possibility. It's late in Qom. But no, you still came to class because nobody lives their life based on tiny, minuscule probabilities. And so there is this idea that we have pieces of knowledge that are not 100% certain proofs, but they are logical proofs. And they have given us, assurance that what I'm doing makes sense. And the percentage is so strong that I'm okay betting on this, basically. Okay? Okay, if anybody has any questions, comments, please do feel free to go ahead. But in the interest of time, I'm going to keep going. One thing to keep in mind, you know how these kind of tests would work, that initially the probability of the statement, for example, the medicine being effective, initially the probability will be small, and as more and more tests are done, the probability increases. But it increases in a lesser and lesser amount. That's why it never reaches 100% mathematically, right? And so, yeah, that's just something to keep in mind, that there is this curve that as you test more and more, the increase in the percentage becomes less and less. The main point is what we already said, Brother Zain and I said, that our claim here is that our soul doesn't really differentiate between these levels of probability. And so when I look at the beauty in creation, I can come to a solid conclusion that there is a designer here. Okay, there may have been some random, but anyways, if we do stick around and we do talk about theology in the future, we'll come to this in a lot of detail. But one of the attacks that Western philosophers have tried to give on the teleological argument for God's existence, the proof from design, is this exactly. That they've said that, okay, there still is a tiny, tiny, tiny probability that it was just a random Big Bang that happened and everything just perfectly came into order the way it is. We would say that, okay, even if it's a tiny, 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 tiny mathematical probability, that's not something that any logical person would consider. And that's not something that we need to really entertain. Brother Adi Zahid, so it is entirely correct to say that if something is nearly impossible, a low mathematical percentage, that hoping for it has little to no value? Yeah, I think so. That's what we're saying. Do you agree, Brother Adi Zahid? Does it make sense to you? Okay. And so, yeah, as I'm saying, like, this is how we live our lives. Okay, look at, for example, when you eat food, yeah, there's a probability that maybe it was poisoned. Maybe somebody who, I don't know, the grocery store that you bought it from had some crazy person who was packaging the food and put poison in it. But you still eat that food. You don't live your life based on that minuscule percentage. You come to a traffic light and it's green, you go. There's a possibility that maybe, there's like a glitch in the software and it's not supposed to be green. You're not supposed to go. There's a possibility that somebody might be running a red light. You might not. Normally, you don't. Okay, you should still look, I guess. But generally, I'm saying that you live your life based on logical probabilities. Okay. That's basically the bulk of the argument. Again, I'll pause here. There's a little bit more I want to say about experience, but does that make sense? Does anybody have any comments? So now when we talk about God, when we talk about the need for prophethood, when we talk about the Quran, we're not necessarily claiming that everything has to be a syllogism, 100% strong logical argument. We're saying that no, it makes sense that God wouldn't leave mankind without a guide. It defeats the purpose for God to create us and then not give us a prophet, not give us a revelation. Right? So all of these arguments, we see that they work very well if we have accepted this epistemological foundation, that I'm willing to accept a strong argument, even if it's not 100% mathematically proven. Brother Akil Nasser, I think if you are hoping for something that is improbable, you are making dua to Allah. Then we shouldn't have despair. Allah is Alim. Ahsant. Yeah. We of course we do our responsibility as well, Brother Akil. We have to do our responsibility, but then we hope in Allah to make our small efforts very effective, inshallah. Okay, one of the main examples of this probability, which was given in a lot of these examples that we just gave, is the idea of experience. That by witnessing things in our life, when we see something happen again and again and again, we come to a conclusion that that's what's going to always happen. We can give other examples of probability, but probability is not just based on experience. For example, if people come and report an account to you, one person comes and tells you something, another person comes and tells you the same thing. That's also a probability, not based on experience. Okay, but here, one of the main examples of probability, like the medicine example I gave you and the food example, maybe a lot of these examples would go back to our own lived experience. That as we experience something again and again, we come to a general conclusion. So, for example, people investigated at what temperature water will boil at, and eventually they came to this experience, this conclusion that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. Okay, every time you turn your water kettle on, it boils the water. And so, that's your experience. You're not doubting when you click the button to boil the water, you're not doubting, is it going to boil or not? A child at a very young age, they learn gravity, right? They drop things so many times, they realize that, okay, it's going to go down based on their experience. They haven't proven this rule of gravity for themselves. They've just seen that every time I drop something, it's going to fall down to the ground. They've never dropped this specific thing. This is an important technical point that this specific ball that a kid has in their hand, how do they know it's not going to go up when they drop it? It's because they've generally seen that everything goes down. And so they're very comfortable. We are very comfortable. We have a very large probability that we know that this thing is going to go down. And that probability based on experience is now so high, we don't doubt it. We're accountable for it, in fact. If I drop something, my mom is going to get upset at me. Why did you break this dish? Right? It's like I can't say, oh, I didn't know that it was going to go down and not go up. That's what everybody realizes, that gravity works like that. It goes down. So experience is a source of knowledge. You smell something burning again and again and again as you grow up. You realize that a certain, how do you say that, a certain acrid smell is a sign that something is burning. And so when you smell that smell, you start looking, what's burning? Did I leave the stove on? Is there a fire? You know, based on experience, you know that that smell means that something is burning. Okay, so these are all basically examples of probabilistic reasoning. And so, yeah, one of the principles here is that the more you experience something, the more you test something out in different circumstances, the more that conclusion would be stronger. The more that you boil water in different environments, you can come up with a more trustworthy principle. Because, for example, water doesn't boil at 100 degrees in all pressures. If somebody had just tested water in standard pressure, they might categorically claim that all water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. But that's not true because they haven't tested enough situations out. Okay, so there is this idea that the probability we have as we test in more and more different scenarios, that probability will become stronger and stronger. But the idea is at a certain point, we reach a level of certainty. Okay, is that something that's like, 100% solid? Maybe not, but it's something that's good enough to go with. And that's how we live our life. Okay. Anyways, inshallah, that's what we wanted to present for today. If you guys have any questions or comments, I'm happy to take them now. Otherwise, inshallah, we can end with that. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.